So we asked now for an order to not count the provisional ballots that lack signatures or that have incorrect affidavits.
I think we all know that precedent by a court doesn't matter anymore in this country.
What is she even talking
about?
about?
And people violate laws anytime they want.
The Bucks County commissioner, who's openly breaking the law to count the ballots, contributed to Bob Casey, the Democrats. Oh. Democrats have been finally ordered to stop counting ballots illegally in Pennsylvania as they try to steal another election there. This is what Bucks GOP posted, saying the Supreme Court from Pennsylvania has now come out and is ordering all 67 county boards of elections to stop counting the illegal ballots, saying shall not count misdated and undated ballots. Now, this was a big issue because what had happened is Pennsylvania Democrats were openly admitting that they were counting illegal ballots. They said it on the record. It's on video. But you know who this guy is. Mark Elias, the Democrat dirty trickster, they say, over at the New York Post, who is trying to steal a Senate seat. He went flying in there and was basically trying to get these votes counted. And the Republicans were suing to stop the counting of illegal votes. And we know him. He was a guy who was very active in 2020, was filing lawsuits all over the place. Hundreds of lawsuits were filed in 2024. We covered many of them here, but he's not done yet. If they can win back this Senate seat, which is currently in the Republican camp with McCormick the victor, that would be a major pickup for them. So he's there. Republicans filed a bunch of different lawsuits. You can see a bunch of them came out. They look like this in the court of Philadelphia County and others. Before we get to these, let me just share with you what they saw. So Republicans are saying, wait a minute, they're going to count ballots illegally? Yeah, this is the video. We saw these three people on one of these boards who's getting hit with these lawsuits was saying the following.
We reject all three categories of these ballots.
Your motion is to reject or dismiss the challenges in this category in front of you?
Correct, yep.
Not going to second that, mostly because I think we all know that precedent by a court doesn't matter anymore in this country, and people violate laws anytime they want. So for me, if I violate this law, it's because I want a court to pay attention to it.
Okay, so we'll come back. Apparently that woman made some donos to the Democrats, or some person on the board did somewhere. But the Republicans heard that. They said, what? You can't do that. So they filed these appeals. Here's a notice of appeal for a review at the Supreme Court. They said, all right, the Republican National Committee and the Republican Party have come out, filed this complaint saying, here's what the Democrats are doing. There are a series of ballots at issue here. We got 966 ballots, missing one or both signature of the judge of elections or the minority inspector. Okay, so something is missing. 663. Missing or incorrect information is required on the affidavit. 50 of those. Voter failed to check the reason for casting a provisional ballot. Okay, 227 people didn't check the box. Multiple defects on the same affidavit, including missing board worker signature. 26 of those. So they say the board decision to count all of those, and this is just in one spot, so there's 4 of these. This one went to Philadelphia. This one went to Montgomery County. This one went over to Erie County, and then we saw this one in Chester County. So Republicans filed them at all the counties. The Supreme Court has come out and settled this, rectified it across the board, but here's their take. Look, we got all these categories of ballots that are bad. The board's decision to count those ballots is erroneous because all 3 categories of those are invalid under Pennsylvania law. It says if it doesn't have those, they're wrong. Election code directs individuals who sign a provisional ballot. It says shall sign the affidavit. As part of that, they have to supply those things. They're also required to check the box. These are in the law, their requirements. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has repeatedly held that the word shall means shall. It's mandatory. And that non-compliance renders a ballot invalid and ineligible to be counted. That's prior case law. But the board doesn't care because they're cheaters. The decisions, nonetheless, to count those ballots lacking the signature of the judges is a violation of the law, but the board didn't care. So their decision to count those ballots also violates the Constitution and the Equal Protection Clause. Bush versus Gore, 2000, said a state may not, by arbitrary and disparate treatment, value the vote of one person over another. One person has to follow the rules, but these people don't. This person has a greater burden on their rights than this person who can do whatever they want. That is treating people differently. The board's decision to violate the election code, even as other counties follow it, okay, other counties aren't doing this, it violates the U.S. and the Pennsylvania constitutions because they're treating people differently under equal protection. This court can avoid all this by just declaring in our favor. Now, the commissioners met in a public meeting on November 15th to vote on this and to adjudicate provisional ballots. They orally announced the decisions. They said, we're going to count 663 provisional ballots, missing one or both signatures, 227 without a reason, 50 with incorrect affidavits, and more. And we objected to those decisions, but they didn't care. Well, we say, here's the reason. Now, the election code adds extra security measures if you cast a provisional. It says shall. You don't get to cast a provisional without following heightened scrutiny. The requirements confirm the voter's identity, and it shows that the ballot was actually supervised. Why? Election integrity. We put it into the law. If the voter does not complete the affidavit or they don't fill this out appropriately, the ballot is incomplete and it cannot be signed and counted. The judge already explained this. If the election code unambiguously requires a signature, then the requirements are not directives, okay? It's not a directive like you should do this, and if you don't, it's okay. It's a mandate. It must be done or else. A mandate without consequence is not a mandate at all. Now, while this court should not disregard unambiguous statutory requirements, the affidavit here is not that. Completing the affidavit is important. It provides proof of the voter's ID and the eligibility to cast this, which prevents a double voting problem. So they don't cast a regular ballot, show up on election day and say, oops, I didn't vote, and then vote twice. The exact form here has varied, but making this the rule has happened for almost 200 years. The duty has persisted over the centuries because it's important. It's a vital tool used to secure elections from fraud, and the Democrats just dumped all over it. Accordingly, the board erred in voting to count these ballots missing these signatures. They also note that the board's decisions to count the ballots prohibited by the election code will violate the U.S. Constitution and the Equal Protection Clause. There is a statewide rule. Some are allowed to violate the rule. So votes are not treated equally under the law. That's what happened here. Some boards will follow the law, others won't. And so the board's refusal to follow this violates the Constitution of Pennsylvania and will lead to unequal treatment of voters. And so we ask now for an order to not count the provisional ballots that lack signatures or that have incorrect affidavits. Don't allow them to come in and be counted, submitted by the Republicans and this attorney, George Bocheto and Linda Kearns. And very similar framework here saying the board counted here 251 in this category. And so they made a mistake in that county. Same thing here, another civil cover sheet. How many ballots are we talking about here? 120 provisionals. Okay, so pretty small numbers, but across a bunch of counties, and then you add them all up, and we're talking about a race with a margin of, I think it was 30,000 votes last time we checked. So here's what Fetterman was saying about this. He got asked, well, you know, you guys are still fighting this. Are you going to concede, or are you going to take this to the Supreme Court, or where are you at, Fetterman?
Behind Dave McCormick, Democratic officials in at least one key county, Bucks County, voted to count about 115 provisional ballots that are missing a signature, despite the Pennsylvania Supreme Court previously ruling that those are invalid. I want you to take a listen to how one Democratic Bucks County commissioner justified her actions.
I think we all know that precedent by a court doesn't matter anymore in this country.
What is she even talking about?
And people
She's
violate laws
about
anytime
Trump?
they want. So for me,
Immunity?
if I violate this law, it's because I want a court to pay attention to it.
So the Washington Post editorial board called that, quote, corrosive to democracy, unquote, and said, quote, county officials do not get to decide whether a legal requirement is material and must be followed. Courts do, and they have spoken clearly, unquote. What's your take? What's your response to that?
They do that all the time, okay? Jocelyn Benson does that. The Secretary of State in Pennsylvania did that, decided, well, we don't have to match the numbers on the forms from overseas UOCAVA voters because that's not how they interpret the law. So their indicia, the check boxes that they think are appropriate, they just say are not material, and they interpret it in a way that enables their party to get illegal votes.
That Democratic official deliberately announcing that they're going to defy court orders and count these provisional ballots.
Well, again, I'm not going to chase every kinds of quotes, things like that, because I think you just pointed out that it refers to about 115 ballots, and that's not going to have an impact on this race at this point. So where we are now, it's very, very close. And I guarantee you, if Dave McCormick were in the opposite situation.
So I guess his point is it's a small number. So if you break the law and it's only a small number, it's irrelevant. Stop whining about it. It's not that big of a deal at all. Just, I guess, eat it. Now, Michael Whatley, the GOP chair, said the following, says, we have now won. The votes cannot be counted, okay? Ruled yet again, undated ballots cannot be counted in Pennsylvania as well. So it's the undated ones as well. No more excuses. Election officials in Bucks, Montgomery, Philly, and other counties have absolutely no choice, but they have to reject illegal ballots. We will hold them to it, protect the vote. Now, that woman that you listened to in this clip, do you think if she was on the line, do you think if there were like 3 people in the room and they were all of her disposition, do you think that that order from the Supreme Court would matter in any way, shape, or form at all? Like she would go, she's counting the ballots, and this order comes down. Do you think that's going to change whether that ballot in her hand counts or not? You think she'll count it or not count it? She'll clearly count it, right? Even though the Supreme Court said don't count it. Here's what Town Hall put together for us. They say they're still trying to steal a Senate race. They just got told by the Supreme Court there but we'll see if that changes anything. The state is preparing for a recount, and the boards are now counting, or were as of this morning, ballots illegally. Now, here is some interesting stuff. Apparently, this one woman, Diane Ellis Marsiglia, the Bucks County commissioner who's openly breaking the law to count the ballots, contributed to Bob Casey, the Democrats. Oh, isn't that interesting? $600. So the people who are in charge and the referees of the elections are cheating and counting illegal votes for their favored candidate. And even the Washington Post is saying it's corruptive to democracy.